So, welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay, and we return to another Elven cityscape, which we did see not too long ago, I think. Yeah, it was definitely this map. I can't recall quite how long ago it was, but there have been quite a few repeat maps I've been given, so I'm trying to sort of revisit them in the order where the one that was sent to me we're seeing it now for the furthest amount of time away. That was a complete butchery of what I meant to say there, but essentially the others were much more recent, so we will be doing this one now, and it is, well, the name of this one, in terms of the replay file, was probably the reason why I picked this one first as well, because I think this one does show a good amount of promise in terms of how unique it could be in terms of how the defenders decide to go about their business. We've got Tommy here who sent me the battle replay, who is playing as the Misty Mountain, so it's going to be two evil factions on the defence, and Mirkwood have fallen far because they are fighting on home turf, but they're fighting alongside the foul goblins and black Numenorians today. But we'll go through the attackers first and foremost just to see what they have brought to the table. We've got Y2K86 who's going to be playing as Harad. So we've got the Haradrim Spearmen who are going to be at the front, of course, the more disposable troops first, very lightly armoured, very poor in terms of dealing damage, but there are quite a few of them. The upgraded Serpent Guard, which does mitigate somewhat Harad's lower focus on their defensive abilities, you know, their armour and such, and their shield value being a little bit lower perhaps than their contemporaries from the west. But they are still pretty decent in melee in comparison, and there is a pretty decent force of them here as well to be the centre of Harad's force. And when you look at other stuff like the Southron Warband and Southron Pikemen, even though armour is maybe not quite as high a priority as it is for some other factions, it's still far in excess of what you will get from the other basic units that Harad have to offer. Southron Archers as well, to offer them a little bit of a skirmish presence. Obviously it's not a great focus of Harad's, but when you're on the attack like this, in a 5v3 especially, even just putting the pressure on is very often a worthwhile endeavour. A couple of units of the Muhard Beast Hunters to offer that javelin pressure that Harad are known for. And then we've also got the Champions of Nafarat and 2 units of Trollmen as well, which is unsurprising. This is really the beating heart of Harad's infantry force, with how potent their damage dealing abilities are, especially against armoured troops. Less effective perhaps against Mirkwood on the whole, but still, they do still show themselves as Harad's best damage dealers anyway. And the Demons of the Desert also count themselves among that number as well, with a very devastating ranged attack, albeit they are far and away really the most fragile of the Trollmen class units. Then another faction which is more eastward bound, we have Dorwinion, played by Sunlight, so we do have the Elvalin infantry and the Elvalin marksmen, and I would assume there are Vine Guard in here as well. Indeed there are. So the rank and file of Dorwinion, a very dependable core of units this, not as numerous as some of the other Kingdoms of Men, but they do have good stamina and they have that good armour as well. We've got the River Patrol just in behind, so again another unit of basic javelins, which is always useful for an attacking force, and there is a little bit more room here and some elevation which can be used against the defenders if they're not careful, so that's the sort of thing that javelins can exploit as well. Another armour-piercing bodyguard unit in the shape of the Elvalin Hammer Guard, and then just in front we have a more serious archer in terms of their ability to deal damage, the Morroquendi bows. They've also got those poison projectiles of theirs as well. Moving along, we have the Dwarves of the Blue Mountains, Ered, Luin, and they have brought the Frostling Thrower, which is something we don't see a great deal of. Obviously it uses the same unit model as the Ribolt from Standard Medieval 2. It's kind of a unique artillery piece in the sense that it does work a little bit differently to the Watcher and the Gandalf's Fireworks, in fact very similarly to the Ribolt from Medieval 2, a little bit changed, but I'm sure that we'll see that in action, because it's the first time we've actually seen it on the field for quite a while now. We've also got the Marksmen of Thorin's Halls. In terms of long-range skirmishing, the Blue Mountains are the strongest of the dwarves, and this is one of the major reasons why. They've got a very good unit of heavy skirmishing archers. Dwarven Miners and the Defenders of the Blue Mountains here, so plenty of numbers. Obviously, when you're on the attack like this, especially as a faction like the Dwarves, you can't invest all of your money into high-tier units because your army would be far too small to be useful. But your rank and file as the Dwarves is also very useful in a battle like this because they've got good defensive abilities and they're more than able to hold their own in melee as well. Guardians of the Blue Mountains, again, another unit of javelins. More Wardens of Thorin's Halls. More javelins. We've also got the Frost Spears of Azaghal, so again more of the, well, the handheld repeaters, which we've seen far more of than the Frostling Thrower over there, but similar in the way that they can deal damage. And then the ever useful High Thanes of Azaghal, the halberdier javelin hybrid, very, very potent in melee, as well as being strong at range with those hard-hitting javelins. We've got Dol Amroth, played by Zelhain, so we've got some standard Dol Amroth spearmen without the armour upgrade, but still a perfectly dependable frontline troop. We've got the Dol Amroth halberdiers backing them up as well. They'll suffer a little bit more from the lack of an armour upgrade because of their lack of a shield as well. It makes them particularly vulnerable to defending skirmishers, of which the defending factions will have access to quite a few. We have got plenty of Belfalas Marines, which is one of the things we've seen from Dol Amroth a lot since the red limit got raised significantly. Bit of a point of difference for them as well, but again, another javelin focus for one of the attacking factions. Some Dol Amroth men-at-arms again without the armour upgrade, so they've foregone that. We've got the Trebuchet over there. I mean, the Trebuchet has been more devastating to its own faction than it has been to its opposing numbers of late, but we'll see how that goes. We've got the Perithil Champions as well, a couple of units of them, and of course the Haven Guard and Talon Knights, so all of the high-tier units here at the back, or higher tier in the case of the Perithil Champions, but yeah, Dol Amroth's heavy swordsman focus brought sharply into focus there. And finally, the Dwarves of Erebor, so another Dwarven faction on the attack. Smeagol has a beard playing as them. We've got the Iron for Axe Throwers, so another throwing projectile unit with the first instance of a throwing axe unit that we've seen. A little bit different from the Javelins, no armour piercing, but a lot of base damage. A huge array of the Ironfoot Pikes as well, which is a very effective front line. In terms of basic pikes, it's probably the best one the game has to offer at the moment. Sons of Durin in here as well. A couple of units of the Ironfoot crossbows and some Ironfoot warriors here. And then at the back we've got some Erebor legionaries. I would assume there's some hidden units over here, just because this clearly isn't big enough to be the entire Erebor roster, but oftentimes the attackers do have this sort of hidden terrain on their deployment zones far away from where the battle is likely to take place. But now, for the defenders, speaking of, we have Hidden, who's playing as Mirkwood. The Elder Royal Council could sally forth, and I mean, there's not a huge amount to stop them from doing so, at least not that we can see, so it could be a shrewd pick indeed. We've got the Elven King's Guard, so the armour piercing in terms of their melee attack is also going to be very useful against the majority of attackers today, less so against Harad, but also of course their range prowess, which Mirkwood in general obviously hold in very high regard. That sort of range damage is going to be important to the defenders if they're going to win this, as is the quality of their troops in melee. The Elder Palace Guard obviously going to be a big part of that as well, ever the fan favourite of course. Mirkwood Rangers Hidden, unsurprising to see them, very high damage on those. We've got the Hiri Ek upgraded, we've got the Hiri Lan upgraded. Considering the money that the elves have got to play with here, that's not too surprising. Very often they run into money problems quicker than other factions, but in this situation, as much as the odds are against them, at the very least they can stack their roster as any player would want to do with the elves. Now then, moving on to Tommy, as we mentioned during the opening stages, we've got the Orcs of the Misty Mountains here. I mean, certainly in terms of numbers, the defenders are not going to be hurting for them, considering what the Misty Mountains bring to the table. We've got the infantry, we've got the Moria Spear Guard in there as well, plenty of trolls, plenty of the Drake Broodlings as well, we've got the Snow Trolls in there, White Road Fearmongers, a huge blob of these units right from the off. We've also got the Heavy Goblin Crossbows, which is another important facet to the defenders here, because of the stopping power that they have. Berserkers, Goblin King's Guard as well, nothing too surprising. And then a unit at the top of the hill, we've got the Goblin War Engine, so some defending artillery as well, to go with the examples of attacking artillery that we've already seen. And finally, for the defenders, we have Longshong, who is playing as Umbar, Naru Sentinels, a couple of units of them, again, not the sort of thing you're likely to see unless they have a lot of money to play with. Very good defensively, of course. Heavy armour and shields is always the sort of thing which is useful to a unit. Pikes, Mercenary Crossbows, and the Warlords of Umbar, so again, maybe in terms of cavalry and fast movers, I mean, certainly in terms of fast movers when you take the Broodlings into account, the defenders do have the edge here, but there is the onus on them to really use them wisely, otherwise that investment will really come back to haunt them. Alcarondas Legion make for a very good front line, as do the Harbingers of Castamere. Corsair crossbows are hidden, the Belagaya archers are here with their full upgrades as well. Umbar don't lack for their abilities in melee, and a defending trebuchet as well, so we'll see which of the two decides to inflict the most friendly fire on its own army today. There's obviously going to be a bit of a grace period here, well, not really such a grace period, as the attackers are simply far enough away from the settlement that the defenders will mostly be in place by the time they get here, I think. But that is going to take a little bit of time. So I'll cut and we'll rejoin when the battle is getting underway. So we begin with the all-important ranged units for the defenders, with the Mirkwood Rangers opening up on the advancing dwarves. It is interesting to see as well that the Frostling Thrower has been sent in almost immediately. I mean, I suppose, based on the kind of artillery piece it is, there are a relatively low number of applications you can use it for, but potentially in these sorts of circumstances where you can fire it down a narrow alley, that is where it could be truly devastating. So I suppose they don't have too much of a choice but to put it into harm's way pretty quickly. And even the Mirkwood Rangers are not going to be able to kill the dwarves off quickly enough to prevent it from getting a few volleys off, which is probably why they've ceased to bother shooting at it. Goblin infantry is hiding, the Alcarondas Legion are just in behind, content to just sort of sit and wait for the time being. I mean, it is a strange settlement really from an attacking perspective in that sense, that it's fairly open really. There's not a huge amount of walls and such, but there's enough obstacles in the way that the defenders have got plenty of areas they can take cover behind, and that also works both ways. It means the defenders should be able to utilise their units to good effect. The Frostling Thrower, meanwhile, with the barest hint of a volley there. Fine for Axe Throwers moving forward. Again, this is a good example of how Axe Throwers can be really devastating. Even though shields and armour do mitigate the damage that these units can do, they're still able to do pretty hefty damage to the Alcarondas Legion per volley. How spread out the Alcarondas Legion are, though, is going to work in their favour here. Well, Misty Mountains electing to move forwards. I mean, this is one of the hallmarks of playing as one of the Orcish factions on the defence. You can be a little bit more aggressive if you sense maybe the the attackers, I should say, are a little bit undercooked with the units that they're sending forwards. Quick reactions from stuff like your trolls and your monstrous units, especially when you're talking about flimsier offerings like the Southrons that Harad have sent forward here. While Frostling Thrower firing away artillery, and the defenders also doing the same. The Trebuchet, however, again, another good example of this map. A few obstacles getting in the way of some truly devastating hits on Dorwinion. You don't really want to be risking firing into this front line when it's... well, the elves should be just fine in terms of mopping this up on their own in melee anyway without any sort of Dorwinion reinforcements, so we wouldn't want to see an early example of Trebuchet trying to friendly fire once more. Goblin infantry, of course, taking a fair amount of damage, although it looks as though the dwarves themselves have also been subject to a bit of extra damage. Artillery from both sides, so taking pot shots at one another, but so far nothing of any great consequence. Something got hit there, but I'm not sure exactly what it was. One of the bouncing projectiles from the Trebuchet, no doubt. Over here, meanwhile, Amroth and Erebor do have their units ready to go. At least some of them, but it doesn't look like a huge attack is going to be forthcoming from this angle too soon. Goblin infantry more than happy to bide their time and wait. They're trying to get their javelins into play, Harad, but find it very unlikely that they're going to be allowed to do that with the snow trolls nearby. That was a good hit on the Naru sentinels there. The attacking artillery. Keeping a better eye on them, because they are one of the most important defensive units that you will have in a situation like this. Meanwhile, Dwarven miners were going to move in, but they think better of it. Goblin infantry standing and waiting as the fodder. Far scarier offerings from the Misty Mountains elsewhere in their line. Dorwinion continue to try and make the push over here. Decent amount of kills on both sides, which is not good reading for the elves, or viewing for the elves I should say. Consider the kind of casualties that are on the floor here. River Patrol on one side, Hiriak on the other. You don't need a deep knowledge of the game to know where the value proposition is there. That's not the sort of thing the defenders can sustain too much of in a 3v5, needless to say. forwards once again. I mean, they will obviously fancy their chances in a straight-up melee against the goblins, especially when they've got reinforcements on hand. It's just what the defenders have in store for them. Well, too many issues forthcoming here for now. Belagire archers in full view, but heavy archers, very comfortable of course, trading fire. A great rush to move in over here by the looks of things. Snow trolls slowly ambling their way into a melee with the Southron warband by the looks of things. Pickaxes get swung. Spear guard front lines with the trolls and with the Drake broodlings, and they will feast upon the dwarves here. I mean, this is the downside for the dwarves. If they don't move forward in numbers, Misty Mountains can use their monstrous units to simply barrel through the lines, even with the decent mass that the dwarves have, and they've definitely been victimised by that. Plenty of ranged support, but not enough on the front lines, and they're going to get cleaned up pretty quickly here, the dwarves. Good use of the Drake broodlings there. Where you see the line is looking a little bit thin on the ground in terms of numbers, they can be an absolutely devastating tool. Cave trolls moving in and not able to get off that final javelin volley either, so the cave trolls will have definitely contributed a lot to this fight as well. The ground has been ceded by the elves to Dorwinion, but that's not terribly surprising. The elves don't really have the luxury of too many numbers. Indeed, I think when they choose to make their stand, they kind of need to make it their only stand, not just their final stand, because again, their numbers. I mean, this is a good place for the elves to make that stand in. Probably want to be closing in on these road patrol reasonably quickly. Here, and there was the unmistakable thud of the frostling thrower there. Naturally mowing their way through the goblins to the point where they rout off very, very quickly. But again, not exactly the highest priority target. It's good to get rid of enemy units, of course, but the fodder of the defending forces. Drake broodlings, of course, with their fast movement, can also shift back and forth across the settlement as needed. So crossbows, another unit that was hidden in the deployment phase, but unsurprising to see them. They'll be particularly devastating against those dwarven columns when they elect to start moving forwards. And they're still trying. Fair play to Y2K for sticking to his guns. They are still trying to get their javelins into place. This time they will get a volley off at the very least. They go for the trolls. I think they were going for the spear guarding behind, but a decent number of hits anyway. They're going to need to flee now. And to be fair, these spears that are on the front line are not really going to be a match for the trolls either, but you want to keep them as healthy as possible for as long as possible because of how devastating a force they can be. Cave trolls. Bit of free damage for the frost spears of Asgard. Allow that to keep up for too long. They're really far, and the one remaining guardian of the Blue Mountain as well. Mountains. The odds of that. The most popular dwarf in the hold, evidently. Ents moving forward along with some of these elven melee units, which is all well and good. I mean, the Ents are not going to be too concerned by the point-blank fire by the elven marksmen, but the elven infantry will be, fairly lightly armoured and unshielded as they are. Again, another example of how the elves have maybe been on the wrong end of some of these value trades. Elven King's Guard reloading. The blank shot there. going to lack for numbers, and they're not going to lack for robust numbers either with these Elvelin as they continue to march their way forwards. Bolg's champions also going to make a use of themselves, far more of a traditional shock cavalry unit, of course. In contrast to the melee cav the other orcish factions have, which means they can be very devastating off the charge. I mean, if you have a look over here, there's a lot of dead units sort of strewn about over the dwarven backlines as well, but there's not a huge amount they've got in here anymore. I mean, they've got plenty of reinforcements. I mean, certainly when you look at Amroth and Harad over there, that's a big force that they have as well, but the dwarves on their own having to go down 2 choke points, nearest as well to the central keep at the back end of the settlement, means that you're always going to be subject to the defenders' ranged resources. So they're going to have to hold the centre of the keep after all, so you're always going to be under the cosh a little bit. If they were going to attack through here, the Blue Mountains probably needed a little bit of support, possibly from Harad. Maybe Amroth would be a better choice with their armour. Cave Trolls moving in as well, but yeah, again, like, defenders of the Blue Mountains, I mean, spears will be good against the Bolg's champions and the Drake Broodlings in sustained melee, but when they get charged into like that and overrun, it's not going to be too pretty for them. Javelins and frost spear shots being sent in, however, so slowly but surely they'll be hoping to do a bit of extra damage. It's a pretty uniform javelin volley there. As the Bolg's champions follow through with that charge. Victory, a distinct possibility for the Bolg's champions still, but they won't want to be in sustained melee with the dwarves for too long. Still, a huge amount going on elsewhere. Still not ready to commit themselves to an attack over here. Again, Erebor will be subject to the same potential problems that the Blue Mountains have already slightly experienced, in the sense they don't have limitless numbers. It is a 5v3, so losing the odd unit or two here and there for a bit of map control is the sort of thing that you can stomach as the attackers normally. Maybe it's not quite so cut and dry when you're talking about numbers heavy factions like the Misty Mountains, but Umbar are not terribly numbers heavy, and Mirkwood certainly aren't. Last Marines on the way forward, going to try again to maybe use some javelins. I mean, you can see how lopsided this has been so far. They have killed off a couple of trolls, to be fair, but plenty more dead bodies there. I think actually the most significant hit over here was probably from that artillery, just because it did hit the Naru Sentinels as we make our way over the river. Good hits there from the Trebuchet. Some routing elves, which is a bad sign for Mirkwood, but considering the Hammer Guard are in here, absolutely worth taking a couple of pot shots with that Trebuchet. Some good kills, and they do need to start thinning the Dorwinion herd sooner rather than later. Mirkwood a bit of respite from the numbers discrepancy that they will be facing. Mirkwood Rangers are also taking a fair number of hits. Marksmen of Thorin's Halls trading back and forth with them, and again that heavy armour of theirs, very good. Harad have moved over a couple more units now as well. Possibly the allies coordinating with each other, realising the need for more manpower over here in terms of brute strength and numbers. Occasional Elven Arrow still finding its mark. Still the Drake Broodlings charging through their own men. Similar to the Elephant class units, they knock over their own forces. And again, still this game of cat and mouse persists. I mean, if this keeps up, they will be able to kill off a few javelin units. Is that worth it for a unit of trolls? I mean, I don't know. For the time being, they'll be reasonably content, especially considering there's a huge amount of infantry over here that will be very good against the trolls anyway. They still have all of those crossbows and the crossfire from archers as well. It's not going to be pretty for Harad if they move through there half-heartedly. Crossbows for the attack as well. If they can get those into a good position, it can be super important in a 5v3 that the defenders don't allow that to happen, but no great shakes at the moment. Our archers with a perfect Overwatch view as well. Reloading as they are. They will get another decent shot off. Already a spear guard taking losses, but again, if there's one thing that Misty Mountains are good at with their rank and file, it's taking losses like this. So how important is that truly going to be come the late game? We'll have to see. Still the Elven War Cries go out. I mean, this is risky, and did that kill off Ents? Because that was definitely some friendly fire once again from the Trebuchet. More kills certainly on Dorwinion though, again fortunate. I would really, well I mean Umbar are going to persist with this. If I were the Mirkwood player I would be screaming at my ally to stop. Because I mean even if you'd hit centre mass of the Dorwinion forces you're going to end up killing Ents. And that is definitely not worth it. The Ents will be perfectly comfortable in this fight now. Especially with a bit of backup from those Mirkwood spears. But I think, no actually, Umbar did show restraint. Very good. River Patrol were the ones in behind enemy lines, which is a little bit weird that they were sent in ahead of the rest of the group. But here they are. Very poor in melee as well, especially when you're talking about going up against a unit like the Mirkwood Silencers. Victory seems certain for them. Council firing away from quite a long way off, but able to shoot right into the backs of these Dorwinion units as they move forward. This has now turned into a real meat grinder for Dorwinion. Again, they can sustain this assault for quite a long time, maybe too long for the elves to bear its burden, but it will take a bit of courage to do so. We'll see how long Sunlight wishes to keep that up for. Frostling Thrower. Ready to go. There goes a general. I can only assume that was the Dorwinion one, considering the Hammer Guard was sent in reasonably early. And not with overwhelming numbers either. That was a little bit of a strange call, really, from the Dorwinion player. And our archers have started to open up now as well, firing into some of the basic Harad units. Also, just send forward a few more units of those because it's already looking a little bit grisly. The death by 1,000 cuts looks increasingly likely if that's the way they want to play it. Of course, the defenders won't stop them from doing so. The Goblin War Engine was going to fire for a second there. At what, I wonder? Over here, meanwhile. Misty Mountain's fast movers continue to make a bit of a nuisance of themselves, albeit having to go through the backs of their own infantry units makes them significantly less effective. Miners, I mean, they're trying to get in and around, presumably to finish off the Frostling Thrower, deny the dwarves their artillery piece. Guardians of the Blue Mountains throwing their javelins reasonably close by as well, and I mean, this will mean that these units are going to start to take losses. Intent on trying to finish off this one unit of dwarven miners to maybe open the field up for them to start rampaging around once more. See how quickly they get crushed underfoot. Drake Broodlings with a lot of mass. The living battering rams that they are, if you keep them moving, a truly devastating force. Guardians of the Blue Mountains. Some of those javelins going very high. Likely to hit their targets in the long run. Valid infantry. Yeah, this has gone into Mirkwood's favour now. Occasional fire arrow making its way across the riverside as well. And it's not good for Dorwinion that this attack is completely stalled out. The Entwives, though, similar to how we've seen the Snow Trolls used by the Misty Mountains on the other side, that monstrous infantry being used to good effect, as it seems. Chasing them down the hill as well. The Elder Council, they'll need a little bit more in terms of numbers to finish off the river control, but as we mentioned just a little while ago, they are poor in melee, certainly no match for any Elven combatant, really. Those padded Gambesons are not going to be enough to withstand those Elven spears, but they are going to need more Elven spears on the front line if they're going to have a decent victory. Again, the Volks champions, I mean, looking a little bit worse for wear now, but still able to get bits of value. Charge into the dismounted Serpent Guard. Again, they are taking losses with each passing moment, though, mostly at the hands of the Javelins. Some Harad units starting to make a foray into the settlement, but this is really not intended to achieve anything. They will, of course, be swamped reasonably easily. So the Snow Trolls around. I mean, the Amroth Spearmen are here to form a barrier, but the Man-at-Arms moving forward. Again, when you see an attack like this, it's obviously just intended to keep things ticking over, but I'm not entirely sure what they're keeping it ticking over for, because I mean, nothing's going on over here. Over on this side of things, Dorwinion have been forced back and are having to start again at their beginnings. And over here, kind of a similar story, a little bit more chaotic. So the onus really is on the attacks over on the other side of the settlement to here. To maybe start doing something with the Frostling Thrower back online, however. Able to get a few hits on the Naru Sentinels and kill off a few more. Fire and Fearmongers suffering the same, as are the Mountain Orc Berserkers, and actually the Corsair Crossbow. Happy little accident, considering they were hidden. Yeah, they're going to have to sort of scatter a little bit and get out of the firing line of that thing, because it can be pretty devastating over a period of time. Not dissimilar to the Thatcher, just a little bit more accurate and more deliberate with what it does. Snow Trolls peeling themselves off the front line as the Amroth Spearmen move their way forwards. Trebuchets. Misses, unfortunately for them. Reasonable choices of targets, though. Mirkwood. Sending those units to their deaths again. Another example of Mirkwood maybe not having the good end of a fight from a value prospect, and that's the sort of thing which in a 3v5, as much as I think the defenders have started off overall the stronger of the two sides, that can really add up in the late game. Defenders starting strong and finishing weak is a very common thread. We'll see if that proves to be the case here as well. Volks champions have certainly been an impactful member of this battle so far, and they do actually have a clean strike at the Frostling Throw now, albeit the artillery pieces themselves being in the way makes it a little bit harder as they bump into the Muhard Beast Hunters, and actually they may very well end up getting cut off as a result of that. A greedy last charge, but no, they're just about going to scurry away. Spear Guard. Guardians of the Blue Mountains, 4 of them. Sentinels already retreating back up here, which is a little bit surprising, but they felt they had limited options. But I don't know, I mean, doing reasonably well so far. I mean, a fair amount of time in this battle has passed, and we still have more than half of it to go. But it feels as though, so far, it's just been the build-up to something more significant. Spears and Man-at-Arms. Clank of the crossbows, heavy goblin crossbows. Won't need any second invitation to start shooting at some good targets, albeit there's nothing too substantial over here. Out of ammunition, Belagire archers being used as a front line is maybe a sign of that. Goblin crossbows. Cave trolls. Warriors of the Blue Mountains. A fresh unit of Dwarven combatants. Another unit of Spear Guard to deal with though, and again the Bolgs champions. Again their own unit kind of got in the way there. Still sent some of those Dwarven miners flying though, and indeed actually several of them did fall, so I guess the charge did connect even though the Lancers didn't come down. That's usually how you tell. Yeah, getting their unit out of the way, they're going to charge in again. From a purely value-based proposition. Again, there goes the Frostling Thrower. Characteristic pop. Firing in a few more projectiles. Snow trolls all bloodied. Several of them with their teeth knocked out as well, but still reasonably healthy enough. And now we may finally be starting to see a little bit of movement from the attackers over here. And about time too. Putting Umbar under a little bit of a test. Ironfoot warriors. Legion should have the edge of over the Ironfoot warriors, but already with a little bit of damage, and obviously the dwarves, as they move in, if they can move quickly enough, they can push their way through these relatively thin front lines. The ranges of Castamere are going to open up pretty quickly. Dwarven armour will come in handy and in places the shields, but I imagine the targets will be dwarves with their backs facing the archers. Crossbows now getting themselves into position again. A unit of infantry per side, I think they need more. Need to be a little bit brave with what they're going to try and do here, the attackers, because if that's the case, they should be able to start making some headway in the settlement. Frostling Thrower continues. Crossbowman and Mountain Orc Berserkers are a good choice of target. Both are also capable of hiding. You can see the Warlords of Umbar as well. Close by, hoping to gain similar value to what we've seen the Bolgs champions capable of doing. Of course, their fencers, meanwhile, in conjunction with the Rangers of Castamere, are going to make quick work of the Ironfoot warriors. Alcarondas Legion pinning them in place. 2 units of the Rangers as well, so pretty lethal crossfire being set up here by Umbar, and things have gone pretty well for them in the opening stages of this engagement anyway. Says it's a distinct possibility indeed for Erebor. Yeah, they need to get their own crossbows and axe throwers into position to try and respond to this, perhaps. Well, what's outside? What was that? Actually, not sure. I mean, the general died. Of Umbar made their way over to this side of proceedings now as well. I guess it must have been over there. I was hoping not to be on the receiving end of too much of that Frostling Thrower shot. flank shots. A bit of a lull in proceedings, it feels like this. And the attackers need to try and make something happen here, because they're in danger of just completely stalling out. I think part of the issue is they have marched into some pretty grisly situations, but when they've done so, I think in at least one of the occasions they should maybe have tried to just commit more units in, double down, try and force the defenders out of the way, whereas as soon as they've encountered this heavy resistance, they've stopped them committing reinforcements quickly enough. As a result, it's given the defenders the kind of organisational structure that they would have really wanted to employ. Like the pikes filtering in. So this is close by as well. Our archers routing from somewhere. They're being used as makeshift front line unit. Still not much anything happening over here either. Perhaps not wanting to suffer the Erebor fate because they know, they'll be able to see the heavy goblin crossbows ready to do the business. That looked like a good hit on something. As Dorwinion continues to make their way forwards. Indeed it was. The Alvalin fall by the wayside, more Aquendi stalkers forcing their way in, but this is a very narrow choke point, although one unit at a time is definitely not going to suffice for the elves. The Mwives moving forward will be just the thing to help deal with a unit like the Alvalin infantry, who's primarily defensive in nature. Poison projectiles being used by the horse archers as well, but they will be forced into retreat by the approaching Ents. Still nothing over here. Still, the attack over here is still kind of ongoing. Harad and the Blue Mountains have an opportunity here to attack in, surely, in conjunction with the Dol Amroth Harad attack here. There's a bit of chaos and discord, but they're being very, very slow about it, just in general across the board here. That would be maybe my criticism of the attackers so far. It could end up panning out for them regardless, because it does mean, of course, the more conservative you are, the more units you're going to have towards the late game, and very often that sees the attackers over the line. But if that doesn't go your way, like I said, death by 1,000 cuts, you'll end up bleeding out across the field and allowing the defenders to consolidate. Belfast Marines on the front line, they won't be too enamoured with the fact they've been sent in to try and deal with snow trolls. Harbingers, the units in reserve over here. Umbar continue to hold Erebor at bay, albeit maybe now with less of an emphasis. When I say that, of course, their crossbows are now in place. I was going to say, and that will be the ideal unit for trying to break up these Ironfoot pike blocks, which one of Erebor's calling cards in the game as it stands. Crossbows. Castellia, Corsair crossbowman. So all of these high damage projectiles, still with plenty of ammunition to give the dwarves a warm welcome. Luin. Just in behind the mercenary crossbows, hoping to use their mobility to their advantage as well. Another unit with that stopping power. Still nothing of any great damage dealing potential over here for the attackers, which surely is just going to result in feeding more kills into the trolls. Again, good. Was that the Goblin War Engine? It was. Enough to rout the Dol Amroth Spearmen, and not surprising considering the pummeling they were taking at the hands of the Snow Trolls anyway. So, again, not a huge amount of urgency still. Very lethargic. Again, if you march in here, you're going to have a lot of units all around you, but it's going to attract the attention away from other areas for the attackers, which I think is key, because so far the defenders have been able to focus on one or two instances of major trouble at any one time, as opposed to 3 or 4. And that is how 3 defenders can overcome 5 attackers very often. Dorwinion, ever since that really bloody engagement, have not really restarted things in earnest, but then again Mirkwood have been engaged in a bit of a fighting retreat. Plenty of mostly Dorwinion cavalry, which is strewn about on the approach. It does mean that they're thinking at the very least about moving back to the final stand and defending that. Realm Axemen are routing all the way through here. What a strange route they've taken to try and quit the field. As a result, they've marched their way right back into the thick of things. Classic medieval too. Warrior Spear Guard. Eerie Peng. Firing away. We did mention at the start that how well the defenders can use their ranged stocks is going to really determine an awful lot in this battle, as is often the way, but especially when you've got forces like Mirkwood, whom it's their bread and butter to be strong in those areas. Starting to look a little bit weary on the front line now over here though, Umbar. Rangers have been recommitted. I mean, the longer they can keep Erebor here and the more good shots they can get off with those crossbowmen, I think the better it will be for them in the long run. Bit of a half-hearted bump there from the Alcarondas Legion. To be fair, Ironfoot crossbows have also been forced into melee as well. To deploy ranged ammunition over here just yet, and nor should they be really, because again, maybe when they move the Talon Knights forward, that will come into play a little bit more, but for the moment, no. Crossbows. Snow Trolls, who have been a real stalwart for the Misty Mountains as well, though. Attacking artillery. Shot it was. Able to rout off some of the Haradian forces. There goes the Erebor general, peppered up by the crossbows. It was Gimli. Snow Trolls. Rolling in here, but they're going to have to go again through the backs of their own men, at least to a certain extent. They don't want to spend too long in melee, even with the most basic of spears. Belfast Marines. Into melee as well. I mean, the numbers of the attackers still means that the announcer is not feeling too good about the defenders' chances, and maybe the ratcheting up of pressure over here, the slow pushback on some of these front lines would suggest that's true. Still though, a lot of damage being done. Artillery pot shots still being taken, Mountain Berserkers the victims this time. decent charge that into the Dragon Slayers of Ered Mithrin. I want to get out of there pretty sharpish though, because each swing of those axes likely to bisect those horses. Unsurprisingly, the mercenary crossbows are making them top priority as well. Hunting down key targets like that is going to prove to be pretty important, I think. Amroth Spearman still here in force, but again, the territorial gains are limited. Again, dawdling as a result. Goblin War Engine not using its flaming shot, which is not too surprising because friendly fire could be catastrophic with that, and also reasonably likely. Goblin Kingsguard moving back, the elves. Surprising that the elves are over here. I mean, to be fair, I guess Dorwinion all on their lonesome don't really have huge reserves anymore to be able to launch an attack on the centre of the settlement all on their own. They need to wait until their allies are in a position to at least move up the other two roads as well. Mirkwood able to offer a little bit of support. Starting to see the defending artillery be really effective now, starting to rout off more and more of the rank and file that the attackers will be reliant upon to see themselves over the line here. Last Marines looping a few javelins overhead. Mirkwood silencers, are they going to get a point blank volley off? No. I don't think that would prove to be too much of a problem. I mean, in sustained melee against the Dol Amroth Man-at-Arms, surely the damage and melee defense would be too much. The problem might be due just sheer overwhelming force. Belfast Marines taking another hit there. Close up into melee as a result of that. Axes aloft. Again, Harbingers ambling around. They have managed to turn things around again, and the crossbows and the cavalry key for Umbar over here. And I mean, what do the dwarves have left? I mean, the answer is not a lot. That Dol Amroth's trebuchet is one of the most, is probably the most significant thing. You don't have a unit of crossbows still with ammunition, but a whole wing of the attack being wrapped up, especially when things started to look a little bit dicey. Again, crossbows on the defence when they have a good vantage point can be absolutely lethal, as we have seen once again. Defending artillery has done its work as well. As a result, we're starting to see maybe a little bit of lethargy in the attackers. The problem is now it's kind of enforced, because I don't know necessarily whether they've got the numbers to be as gung-ho as maybe they wanted to be initially. Dorwinion still maybe a more direct threat. Continuing to shoot in. I mean, Dorwinion maybe taking things upon themselves to try and make something happen once more, because the longer they wait there, the more of nothing their allies seem to be gaining in terms of territory. Fire arrows being used to good effect now as well, routing off Serpent Guard. Very nice indeed. The Trollman. Good hits. Announcer still doesn't fancy their chances, and I mean, it's going to be over here surely where most of the reserves are. Harad and Dol Amroth, certainly the healthiest. Taking hits from that artillery though. Not renew any sort of assault over here. I mean, the Blue Mountains don't seem to have too much left. Still some snow trolls here. additional Harad unit as well that was sent over in support. Surely they need to make some sort of breakthrough here. Other than that, Dorwinion are really the only other active ones, but they're separated on the other side of that river. They're almost their own entity, really. Wouldn't be able to offer any sort of direct support, and with both of the Dwarven factions and their lack of numbers maybe being exposed a little bit. I have to wonder why Amroth and Harad weren't the first ones in as a result of that. More numbers heavy. Less durable on an individual level perhaps, but the dwarves really did bear the brunt of the defenders' fury. That's not berserkers now on the front lines also. They'll do nicely against the Amroth troops. The second hit point will also just be useful against regular Harad units as well. Harad's armor piercing focus won't be too useful in that particular example either. So that particular blade cuts both ways. All sorts of devastation, although that was a lot of friendly fire. It's a target that's maybe too juicy to pass up, and certainly more devastating hits on the enemy than themselves, but margin for error in these 5v3s is so low that will that prove to be a problem? I do not know. Haven Guard now moving forward from Zelhain. The Great Broodlings on the way in once more. Alagire archers still firing away, still plenty of, again, a bit of friendly fire. At least in the case of the, well actually no, that is the trebuchet once again, isn't it? I think it was. What a surprise. Victorious against Erebor, but no rest for the weary. They're going to have to be redeployed somewhere else. As soon as the Haven Guard make their way forwards, of course, they become the immediate public enemy number one for the defenders, and many a unit now being retargeted onto them. War engine crew now out of ammunition, so 253 effectively cannon fodder units can be sent in. Dorwinion still got a little bit left, but I mean they've got well, infantry seems certainly numbers wise they're okay, but I really think that the quality of Mirkwood is going to pay out here. Javelins trying their best to offer a little bit of support, but immediately going to get ripped asunder by the Mirkwood Rangers, who could then get into melee themselves, and surely then there would be no doubts over who would be winning on this wing. Securing the rear line for the defenders, but they have enough to do this up front. Entwives. Guard. Blackback Berserkers kind of isolated on their own. And we may see, as we move towards the final 10,000 frames, that spectre of the defenders simply not having enough left in the tank to finish a pretty, healthy amount of good work they've done. Indeed, there goes the Goblin General. Entwives moving forward, try and do some damage, but the High Thanes, a truly devastating unit. If the Blue Mountains would have one unit left, this would be the one they would pick. Do the defenders have it in them to be able to finish them off? Silencers also suffering that fate, so some examples now of the attackers rallying in a few areas. Champions of Nafarat, full health. These key units of quality could prove to be a real point of difference here. Demons of the Desert, reloading, although firing at what? Point blank into the Blackback Berserkers, and not many of them are going to get back up from that. Devastating blow there. Still with a bit of ammunition though. The importance of a unit like this in these late stages, especially given the odds that the defenders are now facing, going to be pretty key. High Thanes would certainly be one of the first ports of call there, I'm sure. Just a few units in the back lines that the attackers need to polish off before they can start an assault in earnest on the summit of the keep, join in with Dorwinion's efforts. Announcer has changed his mind. Usually that is a sign that things have swung in favour of the defenders pretty significantly. I mean, the pikes are a very important part of this defence, because they can sort of bulk up and stop any sort of advance dead in its tracks. The elves have got a fair amount of quality over here, and they're destined to be victorious against Dorwinion, so they could redeploy against forces that are inevitably going to try and attack up the hill over here as well. Maybe it was true all along. Rangers up on the hill. Champions of Nafarat shuffling back across. Demons of the Desert is the sort of thing which they're going to need to be able to break up the pike blocks that Umbar are going to be able to lay on late game. 2 units of pikes as well, they cover both of the choke points that the attackers could potentially make their way up here. Shooting into Parafill champions. Some weird echoing effects on this battle over here, but yeah, Palace Guard, Elven Kingsguard, the Elder Royal Council, all of the very best really that Mirkwood have in melee. As dependable as the Elvalin are, they are hopelessly outmatched in this. And all of these units. Some decent shooting positions as well. Mirkwood Rangers, an opportunity to do some damage to the attackers as they make their way across. Archers going to do the same, are they? Indeed they are. Less devastating, of course, than Mirkwood's offerings. Interestingly enough, they are sending their entire force over there by the looks of things. None of them are going to take the direct path. I guess consolidation is what they need to do. Avengers, another high quality unit they've managed to save. Seen a lot of action so far though, so they're not going to be as fresh as maybe they would like. Yeah, I mean, some really strong individual units that they still have here. The attackers, but I don't know whether that's going to be enough. For Mirkwood. Like you said, they're going to be able to move across. To be honest, we are going to have to go at time 6 speed here, because it is really just a matter of the attackers marching their way into place. As they slowly make their way up the hill. Obviously the downside to slowly making your way up the hill and only attacking up one hill, really. Anything else over here? And there's stuff on the mini-map. Ones of Thorin's Halls, 1 unit of. And that's where the High Thanes are as well, hidden at the bottom here. Trying to cloak themselves, I guess, but with the pikes still over here. Maybe that's the play. Try and make them think they're not going up the other way, but then revealing your units from the level geometry, forcing your way onto the high ground. They're going to be falling for that though. Our sentinels are here. That's where the halberd weapon type is going to meet its comeuppance, you would imagine, from the high thanes. Archers, that's a very token effort indeed. 7 archers. The Endwives are going to move downhill, however. Oops. That was the Ents charging cry, so it's just like some guy. It's always weird when you hear stuff like that, but such is the way of things. Old Amroth halberdiers now taking some shots from Balagire archers at the top of the hill. A couple more will fall as a result of that. I mean, sending the Endwives in here is an interesting call. I mean, monstrous infantry can bust a phalanx, but at the very least this is where halberds do have the edge, because the armour piercing, they do tend to have stats which are a little bit stronger in melee as well, so they may very well end up bringing down the few remaining Ents. We shall see. Well, Mirkwood Rangers on the way down here, perhaps taking the fight to the dwarves. Don't know. Cagey affair, and this has been a fairly cagey battle all throughout. Chaotic was the description of the battle replay, and I guess it has been in parts, especially down here, but I think the biggest characteristic for me is fairly slow movement from the attackers. My observation. It's turned into a very close affair. They coordinated themselves a little bit more, it would not have been so. Devastating central hit on the Balagire archers there, especially when they were trying to set fire to the trebuchet. You have to question the wisdom of that as well. It could have just remained in place. The trebuchet's not going to do anything from there. Instead, they decided to try and pursue it, and they've paid the price, and they're going to send the Narunari sentinels in now as well. That's an even juicier target for the trebuchet to go out. And that's a devastating hit. I'm not sure what Umbar was thinking. What a bizarre choice. Well, the dwarves have been rooted out. Harbingers of Castamere in and around the High Thanes, along with a few elves, Mirkwood Rangers, surrounding the remaining wardens. They'll be able to finish them off. I think this will be defender victory down here, but the High Thanes do have a bit of a tendency of making a fight like this more costly for the opposition than they would have liked. Is that going to be true once more? No way further forwards, Parathil champions, what remains of them anyway, with what remains of a unit of dismounted Serpent Guard, attacking into the Goblin War Engine crew, so easy prey. All Amroth halberds. There goes... No, that wasn't the Umbar General, because I think I saw him fighting in the background. Is he still alive? He stands out a bit. Yeah, there he is. So yeah, it must have been the Dwarven General. We saw Gimli perish earlier on. Blue Mountains General joins him. Elven Kingsguard being down here is going to make life a little bit easier with that hefty armour-piercing whack that they have. High Thanes now. Just trying to get into some sort of melee fight, trying to actually find cover from the Rangers of Castamere. Behind the Elven Kingsguard, I mean, I guess it's better than getting shot and hit, but it does mean that you're going to be in melee with a unit which is even scarier. As they peel themselves through many different engagements, they're going to be losing tons of manpower as they do so, or dwarf power. artillery duel, and one of the Umbar trebuchets is on fire. Who's going to come out with the better of this then? Could be extremely important actually, considering the kind of quality that is being flung in. I think, to be fair though, with the whole force moving now to surround them, I don't know. Might be a little bit too much for the attackers to try and claw their way back into this now. It's worth the old college try. Flaming shots. Set fire to the enemy trebuchet, but I mean, to be fair, it looks as though they were out of ammunition anyway, Umbar, because they're sending their trebuchet in, and the crew will now be getting involved also. And against mostly Harad forces, so the armour piercing of their hammers not going to be the most important factor. Of the desert. The elves starting to arrive in the rear, and I mean they do have iron-foot crossbows to help them out, but Harad spearmen probably not going to be the finest thing to stand in their way. I mean the Palace Guard now moving forward as well, as strong as the champions of Nafaraz are. That is a bad matchup for them, so the Dol Amroth trebuchet effectively needs to get a couple of absolutely perfect hits. It doesn't. I think that might be curtains for the attackers' chances on this occasion. Filtering their way around, Corsair crossbows and Balagai archers at the tops of the hills. Spears. How will they fare? How long can they last? Not very by the looks of things. Wavering as they are. For crossbows. Moving back, so yeah, I think at this point we can say, I mean, victory seems certain. It's definitely a close one. A bit more of that, and maybe burning the trebuchet. I mean, it's not really going to affect much of anything, but its carcass will still be there after all. As well. I mean, it was a pretty substantial force they sent around, all things considered, considering the margins that we're dealing with. This is a large proportion of the defending army that they sent as the surrounding force. They're going to want to get through these demons in the desert as quickly as possible to silence those crossbows if they can. The trebuchet does crumble. The trebuchet turns around now to try and really have the angle, though, unfortunately for them. And they end up hitting their own men, unsurprisingly. So both sides had their share of important friendly fire. Once again, the trebuchets. In situations like this, though, where it's sort of desperate measures and you've got to try and fire at what you can, I can understand why instances of those do crop up. Kesara is starting to admit defeat in this late stage. And the defenders ahead by 7%. Numbers themselves are fairly even, but obviously proportionally the defenders far less to start with. As really nothing left of the Misty Mountains, but then they were also characteristically quite aggressive. So that is, shall we say, not surprising. The crossbows getting overrun. Finally the Harad General does fall, alongside his Trollmen unit. They'll take a little bit of beating, to be fair. Harbingers have done very well, they've come out of this battle looking pretty good for themselves. Many a worthy foe they've fought this day. Rangers of Casimir firing from way down there, to arc their shots fairly significantly. Blue-clad trebuchet of Luin surrounded. Again, their artillery pieces drawing things out just a little bit more as a result of the artillery pieces themselves being in the way, but a good victory by the defenders, and I think the right outcome for this battle. Like I said, I think the attackers were a little bit lethargic, I think the defenders were a little bit more on the front foot. Good management of their ranged units. Good use of their aggressive units. Just an all-round really solid performance from them, I think. And there we have it. Victory for them. Yeah, 7%. The differential in the end. And pretty much the whole battlefield used once again. Everything on that side of the river, including up to the bridge. Every choke point here. Both choke points, all three choke points up to the top of the centre of the settlement. Everything you would expect to be used was. And that's always nice to see. So big thank you to Tommy for sending this one in. And yeah, like I said, I think the attackers, if they'd have been a little bit more joined up with their thinking, they probably would have been able to take advantage of some of the gaps which were there. But by the time the gaps appeared, they had already been bled a little bit too much. And yeah, the defenders, just good use of their ranged units. Even despite the friendly fire from their artillery, but both sides had a little bit of that, so it kind of evens itself out when that happens. And yeah, I mean, let's see what did the damage for the Misty Mountains. Obviously a good performance from them. The Goblin War Engine ended up getting a lot of kills over the course of the piece. They didn't use the sort of Roman candle-esque projectile that we know them for. Instead, it was more a sort of standard bludgeon that it was being used as, but very effectively nonetheless. Good use of the Drake Broodlings, the Bolgs Champions we mentioned being very effective. Unsurprisingly, the crossbows racked up a good kill count for themselves. Maybe less from the bodyguard units and the trolls than it looked like it was going to be, but the trolls were performing a important role really with just making sure that the attackers couldn't use their support units in the way that they wanted to. So not glamorous, but it was still important, and some good performances as well from some of the regular units, like the Mountain Orc Berserkers did well. One of the units of Fearmongers, even the Goblin Infantry, I mean, getting over 100 kills on Goblin Infantry is not bad going at all. Even if that was sort of as a joint effort with the cavalry and finishing off Dwarven Miners, you don't expect that from Goblin Infantry, and that does add up. And considering the margins, it added up to be something pretty important indeed. So yeah, big thank you to Tommy for sending this one in. Big thanks to all the players being a part of this battle replay. Still working the way through the backlog, but quite a lot of the backlog is on maps that we've seen recently. So I'm trying to pick the ones, as we said at the start of this one, that we haven't seen the most recently. I think Londea is probably going to be up next as a result of that, and then maybe followed on by Karasant. But we'll see. And also, because of the process which I'm going to be going through fairly soon of moving house, I'm trying to make it so that won't impact the schedule, but there may be like 1 week where I end up missing a video slot, but I will telegraph that ahead of time if that proves to be the case. So yeah, big thanks to all the players. Hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.